Nigeria's economy on track despite recession. Nigeria's per capita income may fall to 40-year low, says World Bank. Plus, Naira in mixed fortunes as external reserves drop to 5 months low. The program is Business Express, reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. I am Benny Adams, your guide. Vice President Yemi Osinbajo has been speaking on reasons behind the reduction in levies on motor imports. He spoke virtually at the Nigerian Economic Summit.
The reduction in levies on motor vehicles and commercial vehicles for transportation is to reduce the cost of transportation by reducing the cost of vehicles. With subsidy removal and the increase in fuel price and the pass-through to food prices, transportation costs, of course, had to be reduced. Now, the automotive policy is directed at localizing production of vehicles. So the logic has always been and remains that if we increase the duty and levies on imported cars and imported vehicles, local production becomes more competitive. And this is a compelling argument, and we stand by this argument. But the annual demand for vehicles is about 720,000 vehicles per year. But actual local production of vehicles today, by the assembly plants that we have, is in the order of about 14,000 vehicles a year. So 720,000 is the demand. 14,000 vehicles a year is the supply. So the problem is that at current rates of production, we will not meet the serious national needs, and this will just mean higher prices of vehicles and greater strain on other sectors of the economy that depend on transportation. At a time of a national economic emergency, especially with the rising food prices, rising transportation prices, we certainly have to take some steps which we hope in the end will not necessarily ruin what we're trying to do in the auto sector.
Monday saw the start of the 26th edition of the Nigerian Economic Summit, which was earlier put on hold due to the NSAS protests that went out of hand. Let's take a look through some major talking points by participants from yesterday.
This summit presents us with the opportunity to catalyze, coordinate, and sync all the efforts already being made, throw up additional ideas, and with government taking the lead, execute and implement all that is set before us with speed. This year's Green Book, by a collective resolve, must amount to more than an encyclopedia of dreams to be relegated to the graveyard of ideas. We do not have much time, and our goal must be to define and build an inclusive 21st century economy that the Nigerians deserve. Mr. President, sir, and Mr. Vice President, I beg you to re-energize the steps you have initiated to lift 100 million of our people out of poverty through labor-intensive job creation in high elasticity sectors that have most significant potential to eradicate multidimensional poverty. I beg you to ensure that no Nigerian child is out of school. I beg you to ensure that none of our mothers die at childbirth, that no citizen lacks social protection, that we create an environment that has world-class infrastructure, that we have respect for the rule of law, and that we grow in double digits and our country becomes the #1 destination for patient capital flows on the African continent.
Agriculture remains resilient despite reported floods across some states, as well as the impact of the COVID-19 and also the non-COVID-19 production bottlenecks, the sector still remains resilient. The agricultural sector recorded a slightly slower but still positive year-on-year growth at 1.39% compared to 1.58% in the second quarter of 2020. On the other hand, industry recorded a decline of minus 6.12%, doing much better than the 12.05% recorded in the second quarter of 2020. Similarly, services also followed the same pattern of negative but better performance in the third quarter compared to the second quarter, recording a contraction of minus 5.49% in the third quarter compared to a decline of minus 6.79% in the second quarter. In the non-oil sector, the impact of the COVID-19 restrictions continued to be felt most significantly on the transport sector as well as on accommodation services, but also including education and the trade sector. Overall, the most negatively affected economic activities in the third quarter, though better than the second quarter, are oil refinery, transportation, accommodation and food services, insurance, education, crude oil and gas, real estate, and trade. Nevertheless, some activities also demonstrated strong resilience.
We're very focused on what does this mean for Nigeria? How can we help? And we quickly realized that while we would do whatever we could, both financially and also in terms of sharing the lessons of global experience, that this was a crisis. It was more about helping Nigeria help itself. Okay, so on the fiscal front, it was very clear. I think you heard His Excellency Vice President Osinbajo mention the fact that government finances, what government spends in delivering basic services is a relatively small fraction. What he did not mention, is that part of that is because the government's fiscal resources are limited. I mean, this is, you talked about what goes into the Federation account. When the oil price falls by 50%, what goes into the Federation account falls by 50%. Okay, and that's just a fiscal gap that we by ourselves could not, help fill. So imagine if you're in a hole this deep. We can help as much as we can, but it's really about how do you make up the rest. So a lot of the conversation was about what are other countries doing, what kinds of belt tightening, and redirecting expenditures to where the needs are, both at the federal and also at the state level. And bringing in. For Nigeria, there was a special element, which is a lot of what needed to be done to meet the immediate crisis is also what has been on the agenda for a long time in terms of saying, is this public spending directed in the right places to help the poor, to invest in the human capital of Nigeria's children and young people, to build the infrastructure? Or is it going in ways, I think Professor mentioned about recurrent costs. How can you reduce the recurrent costs? So the conversation was really about that, and it's ongoing, and you've seen the government under His Excellency the President's leadership make a number of very bold decisions. So in that sense, over the last 6 months, and in that sense, Nigeria on the fiscal front has done a lot to marshal the resources that it needs to then put forward appropriate.
To shed more light on the economic implication of Nigeria's second recession in 5 years and what the country can do to come out of recession is an economist, Tefa Abraham. You're welcome to Business Express.
Thank you very much, Benny. Good to see you.
Well, Nigeria is into recession 3.62. That's the news all around. But we also hear from the drivers of the economy that there is a possibility of recovery fast. But before then, did you see this coming?
Yes, we all saw it coming because the dip of minus 6.1% in the second quarter, we need almost a 150% growth rate to attain the projected for 2021. But again, the decline in the second quarter of minus 6.1%, don't forget, this minus 3.62% recorded now means a 50% growth out of the negativity. So yes, we are still we have declined for this negatively for the second time in 2 quarters, but let's still see the hope in that growth. We came out from a deeper hole of minus 6.1% to a much closer to the surface at minus 3.62%. So in that decline, in that negative growth, there's still a growth that has been recorded, and the drivers of that growth is almost obvious: reopening of the economy and slowly picking up of activities, especially across all sectors.
Okay, presently the federal government has got these projections that by the first quarter of 2021 we should be out of this present situation that we are. How feasible is that?
When we entered into a recession in 2016, first of all, we declined from a growth range of about 6% in 2014 to a zone of about 2 to 3% in 2015. Then we from first quarter 2016, the real GDP growth started declining, and it took up to second quarter of 2017 for Nigeria to come out of that recession. So here we are, third quarter of 2020, we're at minus 3.62%. By fourth quarter, most likely we'll be coming out of that negative zone, but for us to be able to recover as projected or as predicted by the federal government by first quarter 2021, it will imply that our budget must have 2021 budget must have been on course, and all the economic stimulus package that is necessary or required to help the economic sustainability plan move should be on ground already. But for me, I foresee that it will be most likely in the second quarter of 2021 before Nigeria will positively come out of this recession. But generally, the drivers of the economy, the VPs, is a major stakeholder, projecting at first quarter 2021. Like I said, 2021 budget must be on course, economic sustainability plan, and all those scenarios that were used to project or predict a positive growth rate must have been on ground. This is November already, and look, we are seeing December, so most likely to be second quarter. But if we get it at first quarter, why not?
Well, before then, the drivers are projecting first quarter, but from what you are seeing from these numbers, you're also projecting second quarter. What are your fears? Why the second quarter?
If you look at the sectors that drove the growth for this, that made us to come out from minus 6.1 to 3.62, they are basically all the sectors that COVID-19 held down and suddenly released. Health sector and social sector generally is part of the drivers of this negative growth. All transport sectors are still on the decline, except for courier and postal services. Air, road, rail, land, water, they are all on negative growth in this third quarter. What we have positive in the transport sector is courier and postal services. Mining and quarrying, everything is negative except for the other mining activities, the mining activities that are taking place in terms of solid minerals and the rest. But for that, we need to harmonize our legislative framework to ensure that the activities that take place in that sector becomes more open and transparent. Agriculture, forestry is still negative, fishery is still negative, crop and production decline. They are still in the positive growth range, but they declined. So if you go sector by sector, a major driver of the growth, of the negative growth in this third quarter is movie, music recording, and broadcasting. So all those other sectors that we are used to driving the economy, they are yet to wake up. Financial services still down, and a lot of other sectors, manufacturing as well.
Let's also look at the oil sector. The oil sector is the mainstay of our economy, whether we like it or not. True. And its contribution to the GDP is some sort of meager. We have 13.1% decline quarter on quarter and 20.38% decline relative to corresponding quarter in 2019. How does this affect the economic outlook vis-a-vis the 2021 budget, the proposed budget?
Okay, great. The idea is, in terms of the 2021 proposed budget, we're looking at a total budget of 13.082 trillion. That's a larger package compared to the 10.81 trillion in 2020, compared to In fact, in 2016, when we had a recession, the budget for that year was 6.06 trillion. And the previous budget was 5 point something trillion. It was originally 4 point something trillion, but the supplementary budget took it to 5 point something trillion. So now, the concept here is this. Don't forget that accompanying the 2021 finance appropriation bill is the 2020 finance bill, and that finance bill also hopes to bring closer to the tax net activities in the real estate sector. And we just heard also the finance minister talking about reduction in imports for cars and things like that. These are all measures that will be put in place. Don't forget, value-added tax is still there, which is on the increase. By and large, Mr. Benny, the concept behind 2019 Finance Act and 2020 Finance Bill to drive 2021 Appropriation Act is incremental trend of taxes generally towards getting more revenue. So we have a recession knocking at our door already, technically. Don't forget, we also have the revenue challenge to fix, which already the government is already doing its best to tackle. But the challenge is still there. So the concept is, in terms of what to do for the government now, sadly, but unfortunately, and in terms of options, borrowing will still remain the most a low-hanging fruit for the government. But all other measures in terms of as contained in the finance bill towards shoring up the country's revenue, as contained in the sustainable growth revenue initiative, all those things will need some time to take place. And again, like I said, it's important to put in place the legislative framework that will enable the economic sustainability plan to roll, which includes passing an economic stimulus bill. Now, Nigerian economy is oil dependent. So if crude oil price goes up overnight, naturally our economic growth will follow that path. But again, we hope that to rely on crude oil price just increasing for an economy like Nigeria that should be driving itself sustainably through sustained development plan is really not something we should be banking on.
Okay, in on your thoughts as regard to what needs to be done, particularly some legislative backup, and still talking about the budget as it is. Coronavirus affected the projections we had for the 2020 budget that led to the revision of the budget. Now we have the 2021 budget that is expected to be passed into law second week of December. With these figures just coming out, with these statistics, would that be threatened too?
What the legislature and the executive will be doing at this time is to quickly take a quick look at the proposed budget already. I'm very sure at the National Assembly, the budget consideration, defense and all that has passed through, it's already done with at the committee stage. Where they should be now, legislative speaking, should be at the point where the committee of supply, which is usually the committee on appropriation, looking at all the submissions and then seeing what can be done. So I imagine at this point that because normally in a recession, what you expect is bigger public spending. But for an economy like Nigeria that has a revenue challenge, increasing the public spending means wider deficits. Already we are dealing with a deficit of 5.70 trillion. If you take that up from 13.08 trillion to 15 something, you have a wider deficit again. So we'll be struggling at looking at how to finance again. So the bottom line there is that passing the budget exactly as maybe second week, as early as possible will be nice, because it will signal to the economy what is expected on the fiscal side. What we'll be having to deal with now will be actions on the monetary side. Don't forget, Mr. Benning, that on the fiscal side, you have the National Assembly and the Finance Ministry and the federal government as a whole working their way out through appropriation bills and all that. But on the monetary side, you have the CBN that stands as the umpire, the apex bank in charge of monetary policies and all that. You need both policies, fiscal and monetary, to be able to handle an economy in recession. But the options that are available to CBN right now, in terms of reducing its monetary policy rate and all that, is already a bit belated in the sense that it will not be as effective as expected again, even if they meet today and tomorrow, because the economy is already in recession. So the rational expectation effect, the announcement effect of what the CBN will do is already anticipated by the market. So what is needed, really, Benny, is the fiscal side of things. CBN at best will be using its development extension of injecting monies into sectors.
So you see them shifting grounds in the policy direction
yes.
to fit in with the present scenario?
I see CBN consolidating right now from moving away from focusing on price stability and all that to becoming more or less a similar development bank, intervening here and intervening there. So what is needed in that context, Mr. Benny, is also a a coordinated premise for the CBN to go about its developmental interventions, because for every sector that the CBN is intervening, there's a ministry or MDA. There's an MDA already in charge. So they need to collaborate to see what can be done sustainably in that.
We're talking about recovery now, and steps are being taken to ensure this recovery gets to happen and happen fast. Talking about first quarter of 2021. But the borders are still shut. What's the implication? Can't reopening or not reopening, how will it affect our recovery process?
Basically, our growth will be strong if we have all our domestic sector, domestic manufacturing, domestic entrepreneurs, domestic farming, domestic consumption, domestic investment driving growth. But as it is, that is not the case. We still have our economy driven largely by external demand, import, and everything that's to do with the external balance of the economy. So borders being closed means that many businesses in Nigeria will have to source their production and local materials within the country. So provided they do that, growth will certainly come. But again, it will take time to move from raw to intermediate to input into output. So, basically, the borders being closed makes a little sense. But don't forget, Nigeria does not exist in isolation. Our closing of the border means you're affecting the economy of Benin Republic, of Ghana. And all these countries also will be retaliating in some ways. And so long as...
we are seeing that happen.
Yes, certainly. And forget, to accompany 2021 appropriation bill, you need 2020 finance bill. And part of that finance bill is to amend the Fiscal Responsibility Act. We already have a deficit to GDP ratio that is way above the 3% threshold that's recommended by the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007. So we will need to amend that to make it stay within bound. There are other things also. The Federal Inland Revenue Service Act will also be amended to ensure that technology is being deployed to monitor revenue collection real time. These are part of the measures to block all those leakages. Then again, there's part of the finance bill is to amend the Public Procurement Act to ensure that there's efficiency in the way projects and programs are being implemented at MDA level. Bottom line, we're looking at transparency. We need our government to become more efficient and transparent in terms of public finances, especially at the ministry, MDA, and agencies as well.
And I also see that going a long way in bridging the deficit, the infrastructure deficit gap. We need that. We need about $3.something trillion to bridge. That will give us much more resources to bridge that gap.
Certainly.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Abraham.
Thank you very much, Benny
for sharing
Adams.
your thoughts with us.
Good.
And most especially, the good news is that our economy is going to recover
soon.
In first or second quarter of 2021.
Certainly.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much.
And moving on our Surviving COVID-19 series for today, we will be focusing on building capacity of the pencil industry for self-sufficiency and exports.
Surviving COVID-19 series is brought to you in partnership with the Central Bank of Nigeria.
The sound of the school bell signals the return of pupils to school after the compulsory coronavirus break. A beacon of hope that business has returned for all in the school value chain. The pencil is a writing utensil used by pupils for writing, artistic sketching and drawing. As important as this writing tool is, 85% of it is imported, with an annual import bill of more than 5 billion naira.
By just producing pencils in Nigeria, we can create as many as 400,000 jobs.
Investigation reveals that 5 cottage companies presently producing pencils in Nigeria cannot meet 3% of pencil requirement. And with the reopening of schools, the demand gets higher and so are the prices. While the borders remain closed to imports, the solution remains to build local capacity.
want government assistance to move into the research industries and get research results that make it easy for us to have Nigerian raw material for producing pencil. To surely bring the price down and create thousands of millions of jobs for the youth.
A pencil is made of a graphite lead embedded in a wooden shaft which is produced from a used newspaper or bamboo pulp. It requires an eraser and gum to be ready for use.
We get the urea formaldehyde resin is the gum we use. But what the Pencil Manufacturers Association are now trying to do in conjunction with the Ministry of Trade and Investment is to get some university researches that has been done on the area of gum. And now, so we're proposing to be using starch, locally made starch from cassava and yam, instead of using the imported urea formaldehyde.
Both Ajay Ugu and Basi Friday are optimistic that with the required support from government, pencil makers in Nigeria will end importation of pencils and its raw materials and meet local demand using local content, which they say is in abundance in Nigeria.
Surviving COVID-19 series is brought to you in partnership with the Central Bank of Nigeria.
Stocks in Japan led gains among Asia-Pacific markets in Tuesday morning trade as investors in the region react to more positive coronavirus vaccine news, as well as U.S. President-elect Joe Biden's choice of former Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen as Treasury Secretary. Bosirable reports.
European stocks are expected to open higher on Tuesday amid growing optimism that another effective coronavirus vaccine has been discovered and on news that the Trump administration has accepted President-elect Joe Biden's transition into office. European markets are tracking U.S. stock futures which climbed in overnight trading on Monday following a strong session on Wall Street boosted by positive vaccine news from AstraZeneca, which said interim analysis showed its coronavirus vaccine has an average efficacy of 70%. Stocks in Japan led gains among Asia-Pacific markets in Tuesday trade as investors in region react to more positive coronavirus vaccine news, as well as U.S. President-elect Joe Biden's choice of former Federal Reserve Chairman Janet Yellen as Treasury Secretary. In early trade, the Nikkei jumped 2.75%. Hang Seng Index was slightly higher, while Shanghai Composite dipped fractionally, while most stocks in Africa started mostly positive. Boss the Able, Business Express.
This is where we end this edition of Business Express. We value your feedback, so keep the comments, observations, and suggestions coming. Be informed that all previous episodes are available on YouTube on the NTA's channel. You can also communicate with us on Twitter, and the handle is NTA News Now. And don't forget to use the hashtag. It's BizX. Business Express returns Wednesday at 3 p.m. Stay safe.